Hotels, as the resorts ramp up, what does it take to get them fully online?
Well, it's almost like a new opening every day. This is so different than just a normal slowdown in business. Years and years ago, we used to see some seasonality. And so you'd have a fewer number of rooms that might be occupied. You'd have a fewer number of tables in a restaurant that might be occupied. Now we're talking about entire properties that have been shut down and need to reopen. So this is really a different kind of an animal that the industry has had to adjust to.
Are there any lessons from the last Great Recession that the casinos went through where they did have to ramp up operations as the economy recovered? Any lessons to take from that here?
I'm not certain that there's an awful lot of correlation between those two things. The fact of the matter is that during the last recession, we didn't lose occupancy. We didn't lose activity. We lost spend. People spent less. But if you look at the occupancy, most of it stayed at or above 90% through most of that time. What definitely got smaller was the convention business got smaller. Fewer people started to attend, and their spending levels started to dip pretty dramatically on that side. But that just brought in more leisure tourists. So they weren't spending as much, but we had rooms open, we had hotels open, we had restaurants open, shows open, shops open. So this has been a completely different kind of a paradigm that everyone's had to make adjustments to.
As the trends turn favorable and the vaccines are getting out there, are you seeing any green shoots in the visitor numbers? I know they're still down, but are there any signs of life?
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that's been very encouraging is that when there has been just a slight increase in capacity limits, there's been almost an immediate uptick in demand. So, and then as you look at other surveys that the LVCVA and others have been doing, you can see that the pent-up demand that exists in the market, meaning mostly in the U.S., is huge. And who wouldn't want to get the heck out of their home or their apartment, their condo, and go someplace? And what place on earth really is better to go to than Las Vegas? It's like an instantly fun place that you really don't need to do any planning for, right? It's all contained here. It's all set. All you need to do is arrive. And so I think as airlines put more seats into the market, as the hotels are allowed to have more rooms open, I think that we're just going to see capacity fill up and demand continue to increase.
So on that note, do you think gaming companies will have to do any kind of messaging to visitors saying, hey, this is a safe place for you to come?
Absolutely. That does not go away. You're still going to have to convince, clearly there's a group of people who are just ready to come no matter what. And that's fine. But in the larger sense, and especially as you start getting into business travelers, convention attendees, there's definitely going to need to be some assurances made, some demonstrations of what changes have been made on the properties in order to make certain the folks are comfortable. And we've seen that already in the airline industry. How many times did we see airlines competing over the number of flights they had to a market in a given day, or the kind of service that they offered, or whether or not they had bag fees? Do you see any of that now? I mean, most of it now is how often they clean the planes, how often they recirculate their air. The whole sort of competitive discussion has changed. And I think it's going to change for Las Vegas too for a little while. We will eventually get back to, and we may get to it more quickly than anyone else, we're going to get back to the fun, the entertainment, the pizzazz of Las Vegas. But for a little while here, we're going to have to stick pretty close to this is a safe place to come and have fun.
How will the visitor experience change then, moving forward?
Well, for a little while at least, and when I say a little while, I mean several months at least, we're going to continue to see masks. We're going to continue to see social distancing. There's all but certainly going to continue to be a certain amount of physical separation in casinos and around slot machines. either with plexiglass or some other form of barrier. Um, so I think that's here to stay for a little while. I obviously hope that at some point we can get past that, and at least not be in a position where it's just mandatory. No, I don't think that's going to happen much before 2022, if then, but at least hopefully it will. Um, we're also seeing some really creative energy coming from the industry. One great example, I think, is Wynn Resorts, which is talking about putting in a vaccination center on its property, actually creating a bubble around the Wynn and Encore properties so that the people who are in those properties know that they're safe to move around for the day or two or three or four that they may be there. So I think that there's going to be, I think the visitor experience may be a little bit more confined to the property you're staying at, which is, of course, unusual for Las Vegas. Most people tend to visit at least two or three properties while they're here. That may reduce for a little while, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to something that resembles what we're used to by 2022, 2023.
And if you're an employee who's been furloughed or laid off and you are returning to work, what do you think those folks should expect?
Well, they certainly shouldn't expect that everything's going to be just fine. I think they need to expect that there's going to be an awful lot more attention paid to cleanliness, to keeping the environment safe and clean and secure for all guests. In some ways, guest service is going to change a little bit because guest service is now going to be predicated on cleanliness and guest protection, health protection. And the same is going to be true for employees. So back of house is also going to be different for them, just as it is for guests out front. Also, I think the business is still going to need to ramp up. So just in terms of the amount of business that they're seeing, the activity level that they're seeing, it's going to take a little while to ramp up, but it's certainly going to feel great to be back at work.
I know we're not fully through this pandemic yet, and it may still be some time before we are, but do you think CEOs are preparing for the next economic shock after seeing what transpired here over the past year?
I certainly hope so. I mean, you know, I've lived here 30 years and I've now been through, at least three of these. Yes, the pandemic was different and it was worse, but still, you're going to live through these ups and downs, and at some level, you've got to manage for the middle, right? When things get great, they're never going to stay that way. When things get truly awful, and we've really seen truly awful now, they don't stay that way. And so you've got to be constantly thinking about kind of working toward the middle and protecting your business that way. Because that's really what's critical. Thank goodness we haven't had full-on closures, full-on bankruptcies. That's a great strength of this industry and this community.
And do you expect things to accelerate once we do get to that 50% capacity and the control of the mitigation efforts returns to the county?
I do. I also think that one of the critical issues here is going to be capacity in theaters, showrooms, arenas, because so much of our ethos in Las Vegas is driven by entertainment, and whether we're talking about going to a Knights game, or hopefully someday going to a Raiders game, which would be really lovely, or going to see Bruno Mars, or going to see someone at the Coliseum. It would be nice to get those venues back, and they just don't work at 25%. Most of them don't really work at 50%. So we'll have to see how that goes. But as those come back online, I think the market's going to get much more healthy, much more quickly.
Alan Feldman, I thank you for joining us once again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.